All right, so let's dive into using the Inventor Assembly Mirror command. So you'll find it on the Assemble tab in the Pattern section. You'll see that mirror is here. Now, before I start with mirror, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the application options, and I'm going to go to the File tab. And notice at the bottom under Options, I can go to File Naming Defaults. And there's a section specifically for mirror and copy. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have the source display name differ from the actual source name. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this be the file name, and I'm going to append the date. Now, I just should have clicked after, but I'm going to append the date to the end. So we can see the file name is being appended, and I'm going to do this as a dash. And I'm going to change the file name here because perhaps I don't want it to be, mirror at the end. Maybe what I'd like to have is I'd actually like to have M at the front. So by default, what I want is I want the source name with an M at the front. Now the default location is I'm actually going to change this to the workspace. So it's going to be the workspace if we're using Vault, or it could just be the source path. So the idea here is that I can set what I want the default to be for the new files that are being created. And what do I want the display name? So the display name is what it displays as in the browser, whereas the file name is exactly that, the file name. So I've just changed the default. You can override this as you're going. So let's just click OK to that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, like I said, is I'm going to go to Assemble. I'm going to click Mirror. Now we have kind of two options here. Is we have this Create Flat Structure, and we have the Create Mirror pattern. Now, the Create Mirror pattern was introduced in Inventor 2026. So if you're using a version prior to that, you're not going to find these two options. It's just going to use the Flat Structure option. So let's use Flat Structure first. And I'm going to start by selecting the components. And I can do this as in your typical Inventor processes, as I can select in the browser. I can also select on the screen. So if there were certain components that I wanted to copy here, mirror here, as I can select them. As you can see, I can select them in the model as well. So I'm just going to select those components, and I need to select where I want to mirror this about. In a lot of cases, what you'll be able to do is just mirror them about the origin planes. Now here you can see is I've got a part that's kind of orientated, kind of not traditional to the origin. So I'm actually going to pick a specific plane. And perhaps what I'd like to do is I'd like to mirror this about this face. So I could pick the face, and we can see that it's going to mirror about that particular face. And you can pick faces or work planes. Now from here, what I do is I pick how I want these parts to behave. So you can see that this can be a mirror. So actually create your left-hand version for your right-hand parts. You could just reuse them, or you could exclude them. So perhaps out of this assembly, what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to exclude this particular component. I don't want to include it. And I want to mirror this component, which is going to create this new subassembly as well. Perhaps for this 188 part here, what I'd like to do is I'd like to reuse it. So what that's going to do is to simply mirror its position. It's not going to create a new part. It's not going to actually mirror the component. What it's going to do is just mirror its position. Now, Inventor is going to do its best to locate it, but if it doesn't locate it quite where you want it to be, you can right-click on it and notice that you can be specific about which plane it's going to mirror about. So if you're not getting the results that you want, you can go in there and you can override what Inventor's thinking. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm also going to mirror the relationships, and I'm not going to ground the new components. What this would do is anything new, it would just ground in space, but we'll come back to this. So I've now selected the components. I've selected the ones that I want to mirror, reuse, as well as exclude, and I've selected what I want to mirror them about. Now, if I expand this, you do have some options on what to do with standard content. So if you have placed things from standard content center, or you have placed iParts, then this will just automatically reuse them or mirror them or what you want or how you want them to behave. And then it's just what do you want to actually preview. So I'm not going to preview any standard content because I just trust it to do what it needs to do. Now I'm going to click next, and what's going to happen next is we're going to see, remember what I said about it setting the default? So what we can see here is that for anything new, what it's doing for anything new is it's putting the M at the beginning. And then notice that it will apply the current date when I go to create it. So you can see that the default here is showing in the display name, as well as the file name and the location. Now I'm actually going to override the default location, and I'm going to set this to user path just so we can see what it's doing. So I'm just going to put this into a specific folder, and I'm going to dump the new files into that folder. So by changing it down here, it's updated all the locations for the files. Now notice that we're not seeing all the files here, only the files that were set to mirror. So any file that has to create new, Inventor is going to rename these parts. Now I'm actually going to go through this process twice. So the second time through is we'll come in and we'll actually look at what else we can do with names. I just want to touch on what the flat structure does. So I'm going to click OK. And what we're going to see is that notice that it's inserted all the new components as well as the components that it's reusing, and it's placed them based on that plane that I selected. Now, if I pick one of these parts and I look at it, notice that there is no relationships. If I look at these, I can see that there is no relationships. And the reason is because the parts that were mirrored, I didn't also mirror the parts that they're constrained to. So the reason why no constraints were created is because I mirrored the part, but not the part that was also mirrored to. So if I was to do this again, and we'll go through this just so we can see, if I was to also mirror this component where this thing is constrained to, then we would get those constraints. So let's undo that. Let's just go through that process again. So we're going to do a mirror. And I'm going to select that bracket component. I'm going to select this assembly. And we're going to do the bracket on this side. And that same component. We'll do the same mirror plane. We get those same components. I'm not going to include all the components because really what I want to highlight here is I want to highlight the mirror relationships. So we'll take that same part. We're going to reuse that part. We'll click next. I'm just going to go with the defaults, except I am going to change the path. And now notice when I look at this component, that notice that the relationships were all mirrored. And the reason why is because it's constrained to this component. So since I created a new version of this 151.25, then those relationships were mirrored as well. Now let's open this new component. So I'm just going to do a right click open. And what we're going to see is that notice that it did it through a derived component. So what this is highlighting is that it took that component, and if we take a look at the settings on it, is that what it did is it inserted it and it also mirrored it. So the options here is you can see that it mirrored a part based on the plane. In this case, Inventor automatically selected, but based on the plane that was selected to mirror it about. So there's nothing really fancy about it. It's not doing anything, unique that you couldn't do manually. What it's doing is it's taking that component, inserting it into a new part file as a mirror derived part. Now what this means is that if I go and make a change to it, so let's go back and let's change the original. So let's do an open here, and let's do something like removing these holes. So I'm going to remove those holes. Let's save that. Let's close that. And when I do an update, notice that the holes were removed on the mirror instance as well. Now this is a derived part, so if I needed to, I could take this mirrored version and I could right click on it and I could actually suppress that link. So you know what? I don't want this to update automatically. I want to control when it updates. Or if you want to completely sever that link, what you can do is you can actually just break the link. And then what you'll end up with is you'll end up with this base solid that has no link anymore to the original component. The other thing that you can do is you can add features. So perhaps on this other side, we decided that we wanted to chamfer this face. So I can take and I can apply chamfers. I can add extrusions. I can do cutouts. I can fill areas. So I can make changes to the mirrored version by just appending features to that derived component. Now, because I used that flat structure, notice that there's no way of changing it. So what if I realized that I actually wanted to include this component? So in my mirror, I wanted to include this component on the other side. Well, because of the flat structure, I don't have that option. There is no way just to edit the mirror and add and remove component instances. So let's take these and let's delete these, and let's jump into looking at the other method. So I'm going to delete these. So we're not going to save our changes. We're just going to delete this. And let's take a look at this in a different process. So in a different process, it's still a mirror. We'll select the components that we want to mirror. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to switch to the mirror pattern option. Notice that some options were disabled. I no longer have access to the mirror relationships and ground new components, but I'm going to do this as a create mirror pattern. Let's pick our components. So I'm going to pick similar components to what I did last time. My mirror plane is going to be the same. I'm going to take that 188 again, and I'm going to reuse it. I'm going to click next. And again, I'm just changing this user path just so we can, easily find these files and look at them after. But again, you have options for using the source location. So I could use the source location, so the same as the original file. I could use a workspace location if I'm using Vault. And even though the default here that I set to the application options is putting an M, perhaps what I want is instead I want that M to be at the end. So I can go and I can change it. Now, the reason why the 25 is being appended to the display name is, remember that the default is to have the date or the day applied to it. So I can change that as well. So I can use these bottom options to adjust the defaults that are being applied. And I can also do this manually. So I could go to the display name, and perhaps I don't want it to differ from the file name. And perhaps the file name here, what I want is I actually want this to be 150B. And I'm going to change the display name just so it matches the file name. Perhaps we'd like to not change the display name. I want it to be the same as the source file. So I could change just the display name. I could also change just the file name. So maybe we want this to be mirrored. So I have this ability to go through and change the display names and the new file names manually. Now, if you try to change it to something that already exists, it will highlight in red. So if this file already existed in that location, then it's just going to highlight in red and tell you that, hey, I can't proceed because you need to change it. Now, if I was to go and change the default right now, so if I change my mind and actually wanted this to be -M, notice that only the one that wasn't overridden. So only the one that I didn't manually adjust is the one that's being applied as this new file name. Now, if I wanted to go back to the default, I just clear it, and notice that Inventor will then auto name that for you. So in this case, it's taking the source file name and just applying that M to it. Now, if I was to override this location and I was to right-click on this and say source path, if I was to change this to 140, this is where I get the red because this file name exists in that location already. So I can't do that. So you can see there's a name conflict because it's red. So let's just add a B onto it just so we can differentiate it and continue on. So what I'm highlighting here is that 1, you can set your defaults in the application options. 2, you can use these fields down at the bottom to override the default for this instance of mirror. So in this instance of using the mirror command, I actually want my display names to default to the file name plus the project name. I can also do it on a per row basis. So on a per row basis, I can change the display name and the file name and its location. Now, location is actually through a right click, whereas the file name and display name is a click and you change it. Now, perhaps what I'd like to do is I'd like to do this a little bit more en masse. So what I want to do is I want to find 400 dash, and I'd like to replace this with 401 dash. So we find the next. And right now I'm replacing display name. So I'm just going to click replace and carry through. And notice I've renamed all of them. Now I can actually do the same thing on the file name. So perhaps I want to right click here. I want to do replace. And what I want to do is I want to find any 400 dash, and I'd like to change this to 401F instead. So I'm just going to click replace all. Notice how it goes through and finds those. So when you have those little numbers, those little portions of the file names and display name that you want to change, doing a find and replace is definitely going to be a lot quicker, a lot cleaner to do that. Okay, so I've selected my components I want to mirror and which ones I want to reuse, which ones I've excluded. I've now set the display name, file names, and location. So I'm going to click OK. And what we're going to see here is that I get a similar result, but notice that I get the mirror component pattern in the browser. So in this case, maybe I did want to include this, is I can edit the pattern. So we're just going to edit our mirror. And I'm going to say, well, you know what? I really wanted to include that component. And I don't really want to create new, is I just want to reuse it. So let's just mirror it in position. So notice how I'm able to go after the fact, I'm able to change it. Perhaps this component here is I didn't actually want to include it. So what I could do is go to deselect it, or I could just say, let's just exclude it. So I selected it, but you know what? I actually want to exclude it. So I'm going to click next. Now there's no files to change because remember the component that I added, I just asked it to reuse. So there's nothing to rename here. I'm going to click OK. And notice that my pattern was updated. It now includes that component and it no longer includes that bracket. Now let's go back to this bracket component. And let's add that hole back. So I just want to highlight that even though I'm using the mirror pattern option instead, if we take a look at the mirrored instance of it, if I do an update now, notice the hole reappears. So just because I'm using the mirrored pattern instead of the flat structure, it still inserts it as a drive component. So it means that as the original changes, this mirrored copy is also going to update. Now, a big difference between flat structure and the mirror pattern is notice that I cannot suppress the link. I cannot edit the derived settings. I cannot make any changes to the part whatsoever. So when it's part of the pattern, it's part of the pattern, and it's going to behave in that way. Is that it's going to update as the original changes, and you have no control over changing it. Now, if I go and edit this pattern, notice that I also can't convert it to a flat structure. So if you do change your mind after, what you would have to do is delete the pattern and redo the mirror as the flat structure. So you can change which components are participating and how they're participating. You can also change the mirror plane at any time when it's part of the pattern. So the advantages here are, if you use the mirror pattern, is you get a pattern no different than a rectangular or a circular pattern, in that you can go and you can change it. You can add components, remove components, you can change the behavior of it. Downside to using it is that you have no control over the mirrored components. Now, if you use a flat structure, it's going to place those components, do its best to try to bring the relationships with it. But then as the bonus to this, so as the con is that you get these new components that aren't really related to each other. But as a pro to using that version, is you then have the ability, the flexibility to change that derived part. Now, if we go and we look at the components that it copied, we're not going to see any relationships created because it doesn't need to. Because it's part of the pattern, notice that I can't drag this. I can't change any of these components because it's letting the pattern set where those are. Now, if this bracket was to move, then obviously it's going to move on the other side as well because I changed the location of it. And because it's part of a pattern, then the mirrored instance is also going to change with it. So that, in a nutshell, is how you can use the Inventor Assembly Mirror command.